It is the year 536. The world has changed overnight. A dense, suffocating fog engulfs the land, stretching from Europe to Asia, plunging entire civilizations into darkness. The sun, once a symbol of life and hope, now barely glows, a pale orb struggling behind a curtain of ash. Day turns into an endless twilight. Temperatures drop drastically, crops wither, and a deep fear begins to settle in. Imagine the confusion, the helplessness, the belief that the end of the world might be at hand. People speak in hushed voices, questioning whether this is divine punishment, a curse, or an omen of doom. For 18 months, the sun gave forth its light without brightness. Procopius, the Byzantine historian, wrote of this dim, lifeless sun, while in China, records spoke of strange omens and frost in midsummer. Communities across Ireland and beyond recorded a failure of bread, the food that sustains life itself. This is not just a story of history, but of real people, men, women, and children, grappling with an inexplicable darkness that threatened to erase everything they knew. Today, we will step into their shoes, feeling their fears, their struggles, and their desperate hope. These are the voices of survivors of AD 536, the worst year to be alive. Meet Con, a farmer in Ireland. His life was once filled with the routines of tilling fields and gathering harvests, but now the sky is dark and his crops are failing. The Irish chronicles describe these years as a failure of bread, where food became scarce and despair took hold of the people. Con's fields are barren, the soil hardened by an unyielding cold. His once thriving community is now filled with hollow-eyed villagers struggling to find enough to eat. The Annals of Ulster speak of widespread famine during these years, as communities faced not only darkness, but also the haunting spectre of starvation. Con watches as hunger slowly takes over his village, and he fears for his family's future. The once communal gatherings in the village have turned into desperate meetings where people share stories of their dwindling supplies and the constant search for food. His children ask questions he cannot answer. When will the sun return? And when will they have enough to eat? Con finds some solace in the words of the village elder, who speaks of resilience, of ancestors who survived harsh winters and worse times. But every day is a struggle. Con must make impossible choices: which crops to try planting in the cold, which animals to slaughter for food, and how to keep hope alive when everything around him seems to wither. His story, taken from real accounts of these years, reflects the resilience of those who lived through one of the darkest times in history. Far to the east, in Constantinople, we meet Leo, a trader. The once bustling markets of the Byzantine capital are eerily quiet. The historian Procopius writes of how the sun gave forth its light without brightness, and also described the despair and fear that permeated society, as people struggled to understand the cause of such darkness. For Leo, this change is more than a mysterious omen. It is an economic disaster. The markets that once thrived with merchants from across the empire are now desolate. Goods that were once abundant are scarce, and many traders have either abandoned their stalls or closed shop. The heavy fog and the failing crops have caused trade routes to become perilous, with bandits taking advantage of the desperation. Leo finds himself struggling to make a living, his once regular customers now too poor or too fearful to buy even the most basic items. Leo wonders if this is a sign of divine displeasure, as whispers of the end of days spread among the people. Rumors circulate about the emperor losing the favor of the gods, and every day feels like a fight for survival, not only against the darkness, but against hunger and uncertainty. Leo must decide whether to leave the city in search of safer prospects or to stay and hope that the light will return. He clings to the stories of resilience, hoping that somehow he and his city will survive this endless night. In China, we find a monk named Zhang. The Chinese records speak of strange omens, frost in midsummer, and the failure of crops. Historical texts, such as the Book of Sui and records from the Northern Wei dynasty, mention these unusual weather events and their devastating effects. For Zhang, these signs are evidence of a world in disarray. The monastery where Zhang resides has become a place of refuge for the desperate. Villagers arrive daily, seeking food and spiritual solace. Zhang writes of these times in his journal, noting the unnatural cold and the desperate faces of the villagers. He describes how frost covered the fields in midsummer, destroying the crops that were supposed to sustain the community. The monastery's storerooms, once filled with offerings from prosperous years, are now nearly empty. Zhang and his fellow monks make difficult decisions, rationing food, offering what little they have to those most in need, and spending long hours in prayer, hoping for divine intervention. The Zhizhi, a later historical text, also speaks of widespread suffering during this time, capturing the despair of communities that depended on agriculture. Despite the overwhelming hardship, Zhang finds moments of hope. He sees the villagers banding together, helping each other in small ways, sharing meals, comforting the children, and praying together. He writes of these acts of kindness as lights in the darkness, believing that their collective faith and resilience might somehow see them through this time of trial. For Zhang, the struggle is not just against the physical cold, but also against the creeping despair that threatens to consume everyone around him. These voices, though fictionalized, draw from real accounts that have survived the ages. They remind us that during these dark times, it was the resilience of individuals that helped communities endure. The darkness was not only physical but also psychological. Communities faced famine, cold, and despair. In Constantinople, the collapse of trade threatened the city. Procopius recorded how fear and rumors spread like wildfire, compounding the despair. He described the widespread anxiety and the belief among many that this darkness was a sign of divine retribution, further weakening the spirit of the people. In Ireland, the Annals of Ulster tell us of entire communities on the brink of collapse. Famine spread as crops failed year after year, leading to a failure of bread that left people desperate and afraid. Despite the uncertainty, there were reports of local leaders coming together to coordinate the sharing of remaining supplies, demonstrating resilience in the face of hopelessness. In China, the Book of Sui and Zhizhi documented how communities struggled to adapt to the unusual and unrelenting cold. The village elders and monks, like Zhang, organized efforts to ration food and share scarce resources with those in need. The historical texts speak to the spirit of cooperation that emerged despite the devastation, with people pooling what little they had for the greater good. In the East, people found solace in faith. In monasteries, monks like Zhang tried to help those in need, offering not only food, but also a sense of hope. Across Europe and Asia, people came together, sharing resources, helping one another to make it through. Despite the widespread suffering and the onset of Justinian's Plague in 541, which claimed millions, these societies refused to break. The ice core studies, led by Paul Majewski from the Climate Change Institute at the University of Maine, provide a detailed record of volcanic activity and the subsequent climate changes that led to this crisis. Michael McCormick, in his influential work Origins of the European Economy, emphasizes how the environmental upheaval of 536 AD paved the way for significant social transformations. This view is supported by David Keyes in his book Catastrophe, an investigation into the origins of the modern world, where he connects the climate crisis of 536 to widespread societal changes across Europe and Asia. But even amid this chaos, there were moments of resilience. In his influential work, Origins of the European Economy, he emphasized how the events of 536 laid the groundwork for significant social change. Another renowned historian, Kyle Harper, in The Fate of Rome, describes how the climatic catastrophe and subsequent plagues reshaped the trajectory of the Roman Empire and altered the economic landscape of Europe and Asia. Despite the darkness of AD 536, humanity endured. The historical records show us that even when faced with overwhelming hardship, people found ways to survive. Communities adapted, worked together, and slowly began to rebuild. The darkness did not last forever. The light returned, and with it, a new hope. We may not face the same challenges today, but the spirit of those who lived through AD 536 remains a powerful reminder. In the face of adversity, humanity has always found a way to adapt, survive, and ultimately thrive. The strength of the human spirit is our greatest asset, then and now. If you enjoyed this journey through one of history's darkest years, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue exploring the past and uncovering stories of resilience and hope. Stay tuned for our next video, where we'll dive into another incredible chapter of human history.